Welcome back to the Content That Grows podcast. I'm your host, Nate Turner, and today I'm joined again by Ryan Sargent, VP of Content and Strategy at 10 Speed, and we are going to be talking about how to get the most out of a research report. So really getting into a lot of what a research report is, what are the elements, the benefits, all of that stuff. We're going to get into that today. So without further ado, we will get started. How's it going, Ryan?
Good. I'm pumped to talk about this. I think that research reports represent such a great bridge for content and content strategies and programs. It's this opportunity to build something that not everyone has experience building, but that has an established format. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel, but you get the benefits of trying something new.
Yeah. So before we get too into the details, I think it'd be good to maybe just start by actually defining what we're considering a research report. It can kind of go by some different names, and just want to make sure that as we go into the details, people understand exactly what we're talking about.
Yeah, we're talking about a long-form written piece of content, probably with design support, that's based on original data, either first-party data or something that you go and collect yourself with a survey. And that original research is the key. That's why we're calling it a research report or a data report. These often look like state of an industry reports is a very common title for them. That's probably how most people have consumed them already.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. And I agree that that's probably the key differentiator is like the original research or first party data, something that really makes it stand out that no one else can do it exactly like you, even if they want to, unless they're going to use your research, in which case they're just complimenting you and the work you've done. And cool. So I think, as you mentioned a little bit kind of in the opening, but can be a really useful component to your overall content marketing strategy. I would love to kind of dig into why, because some people may look at this and say, this is a lot of work. Why can't we just write a guide or a couple more blog posts or run more ads or whatever with that amount of money that would take to create time and money to create this. So what would you say are some of the unique benefits of this and why it's important to kind of have that in your strategy?
It's content that only you can create, right? AI is not capable of building this right now. Large language models can't do original research. So that's the kind of thing that I think more and more content programs are going to be based on, because you're not just regurgitating or moving information around. You're adding something to the conversation. It's really easy to get your unique point of view in there, to get brand authority. And ultimately, this is the kind of content that drives backlinks, right? This is the thing that people want to link to. Content marketers, there's a meme every day on LinkedIn about how you are fact-checking a citation in an article, and it links you to another blog and another blog and another blog, and then you end up on some terrible dystopian loop or finding some statistic from 2012 with a sample size of 3. Like, do your own research, and then you get to control the data, and other people can link to it.
Yeah, and I think, if anything, because we'll kind of get into this with distribution, but I think the other thing is, it's not like, oh, we put a ton of work into this, we put it out there, and then we're done, and we move forward. Like, it can, I think some people have kind of called it like cornerstone content or things in the past. Like, it really can be something that if you do it right and you go into it with the right plan, you can have a lot of different things that come of it and ways to distribute it, and it becomes something that you could just use and market in many different ways over, even a good 6 to 9 months if you do it right.
I love also that it works as both retention and acquisition content. Inevitably, your current customers are also interested in this data, so you're not just getting double duty out of the repurposing. You're also going after multiple audiences.
Yeah, I think it's great. So, as we kind of shift into maybe more details of you mentioned first party research, it's written, maybe there's some design component, but let's maybe get a bit more to the details of what the actual key things are that you need to get right when you're doing the research report.
I think you need to start with a narrative, with a plan, with something to say. And there's always a little bit of a question mark when you write the conclusion of your essay before you do any of the research, but here it's to your advantage. You want the data to support a particular narrative for the business, and you can often ask questions that help get you there. Also, you're not building this narrative out of thin air, right? This is something that often defines your product market fit or is part of your go-to-market strategy. So
Yep.
in terms of supporting a narrative, yes, you're biased, but there's enough benefit, and you're often telling a story that is important to the brand and isn't disingenuous, even if it is a little bit predetermined.
Yep.
You then set up the questions with that narrative in mind, and that's huge. Don't write the questions without a plan for how you're going to use the questions.
Right.
There's several layers to that, starting with write the questions in such a way that when you get the CSV of all of the data, you can actually build the pivot table you want to build, like set yourself up for success with the analysis.
Yep.
But also set up things like demographic questions early in the survey. And this is all assuming that you're going to go out and put a survey in the field to generate this data as opposed to scrape it from your own app or something like that. But set the demographic questions up with that analysis in mind as well. So, for example, if we're talking about the large segment of marketers, one of the things I want to be able to make sure I can differentiate in my report is B2B versus B2C. I want to be able to say agency versus in-house. So any piece of data, any question on this survey, now I can map it against that first demographic question I asked before. There are some demographic questions that don't work well for this. For example, location. Are you going to list it by state, by city, by country? That's hard to include in this kind of a report. Same kind of thing with job title. An open-ended field with job title is just going to get you incredibly low sample sizes. You won't even be able to, with certainty, correlate the data from demand generation managers with growth marketers, right? So stick to categories that are easy to differentiate. These questions also take no brain power and 10 seconds for people to answer. You're not hurting the UX of your survey by asking things like, do you work in an agency or in-house? Are you B2B or B2C?
Yep.
Note that those are very audience-specific qualifiers as well. If I were sending a survey to architects, I would ask a completely different set of questions.
Yep, totally. No, I think that's really good advice, and to me reminds me a lot of one of the prior episodes you and I did around the importance of like all the important elements of content brief, and we just talked a lot about why it's important to get all these things right up front, and that determines the ultimate quality of your outcome. And to me, this is the same thing. Like, you go to all that trouble and get survey results from your own customers or other people in the industry or whatever, and you didn't structure them right, then you've kind of already set the trajectory of what the end result can be much lower. Not to mention some of the things you're talking about, like pivot table, ultimately that then translates into your ability to put it into charts and like data visualization and some of that as well. And so I think there's some good points you shared, and I do like the idea that like job titles and stuff, like even if you have marketing, like 25 people say marketing manager, what that actually means in what their role requires at a company can be extremely different from one to the next. So a lot of good stuff there. But I think for me, the kind of one of the bigger takeaways is just it's the amount of thought and prep you put up front will make the rest of it much easier and flow smoother.
And I can give you an example of a question that relates to that larger narrative. So one of my favorite things to do in these surveys is to ask questions about change. These are opinion based, right? So like if I go out and ask a bunch of marketers, do you think that content budgets have grown or decreased in the past year? Or is your content budget larger than it was a year ago?
Right.
I'm gathering really valuable data about the state of content marketing without needing it to be high science, right? Like this is opinion based. And at the same time, my target audience of marketers is interested in learning this and hearing about this. I'm not sacrificing quality by asking that question. That's probably also a good segue into distribution. Definitely send the survey to your customers. They will respond at a higher rate than random people.
Yeah. And I think obviously it doesn't have to be a benchmark in nature, but I do think that there's a reason that so many people do, you can call it a state of or a benchmark, and ultimately it's often the same thing, but it just gives, like, one of the reasons they're so successful is it just is so enticing for people who want to know,
Yeah.
like, where do I stand against others? How do I feel that I'm doing against others? And also, like, I want to take this to my boss and show, like, look, whatever, 70 some percent are increasing slightly or, greatly increasing their budgets, and then you just cut mine in half or whatever. Like, there's so many things that can come from that. And just a quick aside, I know that in the very early days of 10-speed that we actually talked through some of the points that came out of the SEMrush, I think it was State of Content Marketing or whatever their annual content marketing survey was. There were so many things that sort of supported the reason why you would work with us. Sort of like, this is the second highest thing, like, it was, order of importance. And then, like, the top challenges were all, like, things that we solved, and just sort of, like, kind of helped fit that and show that story. And so a lot of different ways that it can be appealing to the people who want to consume it. And therefore, like you said, it gets shared more, builds authority and trust, and gets backlinks and all that stuff.
I mean, not to cheapen it, but it is the B2B version of what Hogwarts House are you. I mean, people want to know, and they want to share, and they want to be proud of that.
Yeah. Yes. All right, so you were kind of trying to segue into distribution, so I think we can go ahead and chat about that too. I don't know. Like, where do you want to start with distribution, and what do you want to share there?
Send it to your own email list. They're going to give you really valuable data, and your current customers also ultimately represent. I mean, it is, I suppose, possible, but rare that your current customers don't match the kinds of customers you want to acquire. But most of the time, the people that are already buying are the people that you want to continue buying. Like, you want their friends, right? So that if the survey lands with your current customers, it's going to land with your larger ICP, and it's also an easy way to throw them a bone. Do a swag giveaway. Do something about how you're going to email the results to them first, right? Like, provide some kind of carrot to get them to take the survey. It does not have to be much for your current customers. I promise. And then make sure that they are only one piece of the puzzle. As important as it is to reach out to current customers, I think it's also important to make sure that that's not your entire sample size. Community groups are great. If you can get a sponsored email to a Slack community, that's gold. If you can get a sponsored newsletter slot, maybe it's something you're already paying for, and you can change the content out for a month and make it a little less self-serving. Because somehow asking people to take a survey is less self-serving than, like, a discount on your product, which is great. I love that works psychologically. That's another great way to get a bunch of people. And then, of course, social shares are always helpful there too.
Yeah, cool. So it is important, I think, to clarify, because I think we're going to talk about both parts of it. Right now, you're talking about distribution as in how to get responses to the survey and build the original research.
Yeah, we're firmly in data collection mode, not content
Promotion.
distribution mode here. With these tactics.
Cool. Yeah, so that makes sense. Emailing customers, existing people in your database, definitely. I think I agree that community groups, newsletter sponsorship, any sort of, like, podcast sponsorship, anything there that would kind of just get right in front of the right people and have some interest there. Podcast might be a little harder because you got to kind of go from an audio prompt to go do something. But if you have a short and simple enough URL or something, that can work. And then, I think the social side, and even potentially social ads, if you have a good way to target well and push some of that there, I think all those things can be great.
I've gone as far as putting a sticky header on a blog, like applied to the entire blog template for 2 weeks. That one I've had mixed success with. I've gotten 100 survey responses from that, and I've also gotten 10. So some of that depends on what your content program looks like, what your organic traffic looks like already. But there's a lot of creative ways to make sure that the survey gets in front of a lot of eyeballs, and people like taking surveys. So The other nice thing is we're not after a sample size of 10,000 here. We're after a few hundred.
Yeah.
If you get 50 responses, I think the report is going to be not as strong as it could be.
Yeah.
But most of these reports are not built off of thousands of responses.
Yeah. And that was going to be my next question, because I'm sure that's something anyone kind of listening to this would be considering is, how many do I have to be able to get? Because I think it could easily feel like you have to get, 3,000 or something. So what would you consider the floor?
Anything over about 150 responses, we can make it work. It's sub 100 responses that I start to get nervous.
Yeah.
And if we only have 150, I might encourage one more push, one more email, right, to try to get up to 200 or something responses.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. So in terms of then, so we kind of talked about like the benefits, the importance of like why, like how you structure the questions, putting time in up front to get all of that. Now kind of talked about like how to get responses, how many you need. What's worth, like, what do you want to touch on in terms of like actually building the report and designing the report, some of that?
Make sure you have design resources lined up.
Yeah.
It seems very simple, right? Everyone built some silly little pie chart for science in middle school or high school, and it's like, oh, we're just doing that 40 times. It's not that. Mm-hmm. Getting all of the data visualization correct, making sure it's all branded, it's all easy to read, it all renders right on mobile, all of that requires a great designer, and it requires a designer who understands data visualization specifically. The designer that built some glorious illustration for your ebook might not be the designer who's building these graphs. Yeah. There are some particular best practices, for example, when to use a pie chart and when to use a bar chart. And you want someone with that expertise. I think that's a really important piece of the puzzle.
Yeah.
And for these reports, you might end up with 40 graphs. And that takes time. You can't just spin these up in a day.
Yeah.
So plan for that when you're building the thing out. Plan for that with your resource. I think that's a big one. They also won't know which charts to build until you've analyzed the data and started writing the report. So there's a bit of an order of operations to this, I think, where you analyze the data, you build the draft of the written report, plug in all the graphs, send the creative brief to the designer so they can work on the graphs while you revise the report with an editor.
Yep.
And then it all comes together at the end. Then, of course, CMS and uploading and all that good stuff. So there's that piece of the building. Ultimately, you want to build the charts that support that narrative you built at the beginning. And I think that the more of a story you can tell in the report, the better. You want it to read like an article, like that has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Mm-hmm. Not like a series of charts strung together with a few sentences here and there.
Right.
And telling that story ends up being why people read to the end and why people are likely to share. You're almost spoon feeding them some conclusions, and inevitably those end up on LinkedIn. So
yeah, I think that's great. And I think the other thing is, I think the default consideration typically is we'll build this in a PDF. But I think that, if it's something you're going to do once a year, then I think that starts to open up some opportunities to say, hey, let's do something that's like not just cramming this into our typical blog template layout, but we're actually going to build, a dedicated page, visually, appealing, the whatever scroll mechanics and everything kind of flow well and like work well with the data. And to your point, that kind of like pulls that storyline through and makes it like this story with a bunch of data from beginning to end. I think can be really powerful. And in there you potentially want to consider if you say like, hey, this is the state of whatever report or whatever, like how are you thinking about naming it? Even just being mindful of the URL and how, if it's in a folder that you differentiate then on the slug, or if it's just a unique page on the root but like you don't want to have it be conflicting to like next year you're like, oh shoot, we didn't think about this. So even just some simple things around there to make sure it's got the year or a number or something that can kind of help indicate, where this stands in the sequence of multiple reports you've done.
This one's way in the weeds, but you can also set up a generic URL and then every year, like host each year's report at their own slug and redirect the generic one to the current year every time.
Yep.
Which is also handy because then if the backlink is to the generic one, it'll automatically send people to the new year when you put out the new report, which is nice. So yeah, absolutely consider all of that stuff. The other, I think, underrated piece is ask your friends who are industry experts or thought leaders to weigh in on the draft of the report. And I'd tee this up as well. I'd say, hey, we did this report. Here are the 3 graphs that we thought were most fascinating, most unusual, surprised us, have the most to do with your pet piece of thought leadership.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think? Would you give us a quote? We'll put your headshot in there. We'll link to you.
Yeah.
We'll set all this up. Your report gains authority. They probably took 5 minutes to provide this quote. Like, this is not a big ask. Also, then when the final report comes out, you get to tell them, hey, it's out. Your picture's on our website. Do you want to share this on LinkedIn? So it's a huge win-win, and it makes the report more interesting to read. They get more of these conclusions, more of this commentary woven throughout the charts and graphs.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's really smart. Cool. So you mentioned, then they want to share it on LinkedIn. So let's go ahead and kind of maybe just bring it home with the ways that you would then distribute the end result, the end product. I mentioned before, you can, like one of the biggest things is repurposing. Like, and I mentioned that you can get potentially 6 to 9 months. Like you said something about 30, 40 graphs, or data visualizations in there. Every single one of those could be at least one, LinkedIn post. You could do roundups that say, batch them together, or like you mentioned, like a B2B, B2C differentiation. You could, do something that kind of highlights the narrative on the B2C side and then the opposite, and pull some of those like sub stories through into additional pieces of content, to where I think there's just so many things you could do. You can make videos that kind of talk about it, highlight it, all kinds of things you can continue to repurpose and just treat that as like, again, not just we did all this work, we published it, and now we're moving on to do more things, but we did all this work, and now here's all the ways that we're going to weave this into our marketing, webinars, emails, like any of the campaigns, pull stuff into like stats and things into your landing pages for paid search. All that stuff can really be a huge benefit and reason to distribute. And so the repurposing side, I think, is huge.
I agree. The repurposing is, this can fuel a social strategy for literally months. And the repurposing, I think, also becomes then part of your future like written content as well. You can break this out into other articles. And all of that repurposing then becomes part of a larger distribution strategy. So the internal links are going to write themselves. Every time you write another article that has anything to do with any of the questions you asked, cite the statistic from your own survey, put the internal link in.
Yep.
That one's like, you almost don't even have to have this beautiful internal linking strategy as long as you remember to use your own statistics and hit Control K. Like, this is going to be that easy. We talked a little bit about backlinks. This can be the centerpiece of a digital PR campaign, either that you can complete, that you work on yourself, or that you partner with an agency for. This is really the kind of thing people want to write about and share from that like PR standpoint, because it's original research. It's not regurgitated information. So that's a big one. And then use this as the fuel for sponsorships. I think content marketers talk a lot about how, we really want to make sure that the content we share in the sponsored email or this newsletter or the Slack community positions us as the kind of resource that people want to subscribe to. And then inevitably it gets distilled down to a product offer. And sharing original research becomes the fulfillment of that promise. You get to actually share with a brand new audience something deeply valuable. I've turned this into webinars. I've turned research reports into sponsored webinars. I've turned research reports into sponsored emails. Because we sponsored the survey distribution through community, I've also had the community pick up the finished report and just share it for free.
Right.
So like, there's all sorts of ways to really, really get your money's worth out of the report once it's built.
Yep, I agree. Yeah, so there's a lot there that we covered, but I think that it does a good job of kind of covering all the points at a high level. One other thing I wanted to mention, kind of around digital PR and just maybe benefit as well, is maybe a couple years into my time at Sprout, we started doing what was called the Sprout Index. And so it was exactly what we're talking about. It was looking at our, maybe we didn't talk about this as much. You don't even necessarily have to get all of it from surveying. You can also just anonymize and aggregate usage of your product to understand as well. So we had sort of the data science side of it, looking at our own like usage behaviors and like how people use the tool, survey responses from customers, survey responses from other people in the industry, and started out doing the report once a year. I think it moved into twice a year or quarterly, but it wasn't, it's just sort of like every year. It was always useful to marketing and could be, we could weave it into a lot of different things. Probably didn't do nearly as much on the distribution side as we could have. But, it wasn't until maybe 5 or 6 years of doing them, at a rate of more than annually. So probably at least 10 or 12 of them. But eventually got to a point where we had like some inbound inquiries from like the New York Times saying, can we cite your report, in this article and stuff like that, where there's also something to be said for taking the long view on it and saying like, we know that if we continue to do this kind of work, it's going to have a compounding effect over the next several years, and like really that the authority will kind of be exponential. And so I think that is it OpenView, their SaaS benchmarks report, and then they do multiple now, like PLG and whatnot. Like, I think that's another one that they could have done it once or twice and it would have been really effective. But by doing it every year and really becoming kind of a staple in the industry and something that people look at, I think has an outsized impact over the long term. So something else to think about is if this feels like something that's a good fit for your company, then like, sure, try something once, but if you think it's something you want to keep doing, then consider that, several years down the road, the benefit and impact from this could be so much more than you even could imagine.
And that's what we talk about with content being a virtuous circle and the flywheel and all that stuff. Like this is the content that makes that work. It's funny you saying that makes me think of a couple other points. Year over year data also then gets to inform the next report. Yeah. So the graph gets even more exciting, more powerful for readers when you have multiple years of data in there, and you get to tell the story again. Like, this declined last year, but now we're recovering, right? What a powerful state. Everybody wants to read that, right? So, and then supplementing the report, the survey, with first-party data. You talking about how Sprout used all of the data that was already present kind of in the ecosystem. I have a similar story. Make Music has an online practice tool for music students, thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of pieces of interactive sheet music for kids to play along with. And meant we had all the data. We paid royalties. We knew exactly which pieces were getting played the most. And we knew which pieces were getting played because teachers assigned them and which pieces were getting played because kids wanted to play them. And turns out that the Marvel Cinematic Universe was in one of those two categories.
Yeah. Nice. I think that makes sense, and totally agree that if you do it multiple years and are thoughtful in structuring the questions in a way that you can reuse some of them, then you do start to get some of that like data over time, and that becomes really powerful. So cool. Anything else you want to add to this topic before we wrap it up?
I think just I would close by saying this sounds like a lot of work, and it is, but it's also sometimes easier than it looks. Like, you probably have some of the building blocks already in place.
Yeah.
And it can be a matter of committing and getting it over the finish line, as opposed, or just starting in the first place, as opposed to this impossible task that competitors can produce and content that's out of your reach. It is possible.
Yeah. Yep. Which is why we offer it as a service as well. It just like can be overwhelming whether you don't have bandwidth or anything else. It just kind of sometimes it's just easier to have someone do it the first time and kind of like see, oh, okay, I understand now, and maybe you could take it from there or keep doing it or whatever. So, but yeah, it is great. I am a huge fan of reports like this because of the originality of it and because of the fact that you can just repurpose and distribute for a long time and get a lot out of it. So it's a little bit more work up front, but can really get a lot out of it. So yeah, it's been a good chat, and we will go ahead and wrap it up on this topic. Feel free to reach out to us if you want to chat at all about research reports and if they might work for your company. But be sure to check out any prior episodes on 10speed.io/podcast, and be sure to like and subscribe on the platform of your choice. With that, we'll wrap it up. Thanks, Ryan.
Thanks.